I'm in the middle of doing some prep for Thanksgiving, getting things ready. But there was a topic. Well, we got our first comment on the YouTube channel, so that's cool. You throw things out there and hope that people will see it and care enough to talk about it. But it's fun to have that actually happen so quickly. But anyways, it was a question about picking Tac Ops in different games. And I had already been working on a video for this, but I figured, what the hell, I've got some time while things are cooking, so I might as well talk about this now. So, Tac Ops, for those of you that are new to Kill Team, there are 3 ways in which you score points. The first is the crit op, so that's the mission that you're playing. Both players are trying to achieve the same thing. There's 3 objectives on the table as of now. You're usually doing actions interacting with those objectives to score points. You can score up to 6. The second is the kill op. And what the kill op is basically you tally up your kills as you're playing the game, and you get more points depending on how much of your opponents force you kill. And if you killed a larger percentage than they did, you get an extra point up to a total of 6. So again, you and your opponent trying to achieve the same thing. The Tac Op is where things change quite a bit. The Tac Op, each of you will select one kind of additional mission that you're trying to accomplish from one of 4 categories. Each team has access to different categories. These are called the Tac Op Archetypes. And the reason that the Tac Op is so important is, 1, it's a third of your total points available in a game. So that's important. But 2, the Tac Op is where you have the most personal agency in how you score. Certain missions, if one player completes an action on a point, the other player can't. And so if your opponent goes first in a turning point, you may be in a situation where it's not actually possible for you to score all of the points that you want to score. The kill op, sometimes your opponent will just move models away from you into heavy cover and conceal, trying not to die. So you might not always have control over how those points are scored. But with the Tac Op, if you're planning for it, earlier in deployment, you know what you need to score, you have a game plan, that's where you can really try to lock in those 6 points. And, importantly, Kill Team has what's called the primary op. So in the first strategic phase, in the first turn of the game, one of the first things that you and your opponent will do is secretly select either the crit op, the kill op, or the Tac Op to be your primary op. And for that one, you'll score 50% more points. And which one you've selected is hidden information until your tallying scores up at the end of the game. So, if the crit op is where you can most reliably lock in 6 points, it's also most reliably going to be what you want your primary op to be, so you can actually score 9 points on it. And that is going to go a long way towards winning you games. So, not only is it generally a good idea to pick your crit op as your primary if you have a good game plan, but I believe Blades of Khaine are really good at scoring a lot of Tac Ops because it's a fast team, because it's an APL3 team. So you don't have to make as much of a choice between, okay, I've got to go activate this model, and I can either fight or I can score points. With APL3, you can do both. So let's talk a bit about the Tac Ops themselves. Now, I'm working on a video on team selection where we'll cover a bit of the same ground. But Blades of Khaine is unique in that our Tac Op archetypes, which of those 4 categories we pick from, are determined by which of the 3 aspects in our team we have the highest number of. So we always have access to the Seek and Destroy archetype, but we also have access to either Security, Recon, or Infiltration, depending on the composition of the team. And if you were to take a mixed team with, say, 3 Howling Banshees, 3 Striking Scorpions, and 2 Dire Avengers, then you would have access to Seek and Destroy, Recon, or Infiltration. And I don't think I'm missing anything here. I could easily have forgotten something. But there's no other team in the game that can select from more than 2 archetypes as of now. So that's pretty interesting, and it could potentially leave your opponent guessing as to which one you're going to pick until you start scoring it. So, which do we select? I'm going to talk this over two different ways. First, if you just want the quick and dirty, easiest, safest option in the majority of games without having to think all that hard, the TLDR of Tac Ops, here's what you do. Take plant beacons from Recon. Requires that you have more Howling Banshees than your other aspects, and it's probably going to be the easiest to score and hardest for your opponent to deny in your games. In the majority of your games, you should be able to pretty reliably max it out unless things go really wrong for you. But that's a huge generalization, so let's break things down a bit more and discuss each of the archetypes and how it functions specifically for Blades of Khaine, because we have some tools that other teams might not. Alright, so first up is Seek and Destroy. We always have access to the Seek and Destroy archetype regardless of team construction. And there are 3 options in Seek and Destroy as with the others. First, Champion. So I'm going to go ahead and put images of the cards up so I don't have to read you the exact wording. I trust you all to be able to read. Champion is a bit of a mixed bag. It isn't the worst thing in the world, but I think we usually have better options for Blades of Khaine. It requires that you basically call your shot at the before the turn starts of who's going to get kills. And against any teams that aren't Space Marines, in order to max out your points, you need to have your champion get 2 kills in turning point 2, 3, and 4. It's not impossible, but it's going to be easy for your opponent to deny a lot of the time. And it can easily go south if you fluff one roll. So, I don't love it. Against Space Marine players, it's slightly better since you only need to get 1 kill to get both of the points. But it's going to be a lot harder for our models to reliably kill a Space Marine in 1 activation. A lot easier to fail, and then you're really behind on points because you're scoring nothing. So I'd be most likely to take this against the biggest Horde teams, like 14 model Death Corps, Chaos Cults, or like if it was a Wormblade player that's not taking any cult agents. I suppose theoretically they could have a stroke during operative selection and decide to not take any. But these are the matchups where you're most likely going to get some double kills, and I would still rather take something else if I'm really trying to win. The second Tac Op for Seek and Destroy is Storm Objectives, and I would recommend against this Tac Op with Blades of Khaine. Our team is squishy enough that you really don't want to stand on objectives and scrap with people. And both Howling Banshees and Striking Scorpions have a way to get additional movement after killing a model in melee. So if your opponent's on an objective, you may well end up standing on it to fight them, but then you're going to be 3 inches away and ideally hidden behind heavy cover on Vulcus. You want to try and use those techniques not to stand on objectives, but to stand away from them and to not get shot. So I do think that we have better options for sure. Now, the third Seek and Destroy Tac Op is one that I actually run quite a bit, and that's Overrun. So, Overrun requires that you kill an enemy model with one of yours that's on your opponent's half of the board. That'll get you 1 point, and then you have to have one of your models that was on the opponent's half of the board and killed an enemy model survive through the turning point. There is an APL restriction on this, is that you have to have 3 APL worth of models survive, and because we're an APL 3 team and we're a fast melee team, and a lot of the time we want to be fighting in the opponent's territory anyways, it's pretty good for us. It's kind of rewarding us for playing the game that oftentimes we want to play anyways. And, it's going to be a lot better for us than most teams in the game. Like any APL 2 teams, they need to have 2 models get those kills and survive. So, a lot of teams may be really well equipped to score 1 point on Overrun, but I think we're one of the better teams in the game to get that 2nd point, because of aspect techniques like the Woe, Rain of Tears, strike, and fade. They just give us a lot of tools to make that happen and shift our models into better positions out of line of sight so they can survive until the end of the turning point. So, let's talk about security Tac Ops next. If you have enough Dire Avengers, you have access to security. And the first one is Secure Center. Now, this forces us to stand in the center of the table and on the center line. And I would literally never take this, not even to be a troll. It's the opposite of what our team naturally wants to do. We're exposing ourselves to incoming fire and just aren't sturdy enough to stand up to it. Certain teams like Warp Coven may be able to get away with it, or the new Plague Marine team. I don't think we can. I think there's much better options. The second security Tac Op is Take Ground. Now, this isn't as bad as Secure Center, but I still wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's truly terrible. I think it's likely better for us on the Volcus terrain than most other maps, just because of how good our Banshees are at dealing damage in or maneuvering around the strongholds. But I still don't think this is where we want to be. Again, we're squishy, so if we're having to pile APL in to hold specific places on the map where our opponents know we're going to have to stand, that's pretty rough for us. And I just don't think this is where the team wants to be. Now, the third security Tac Op is Contain. And out of the security Tac Ops, I think this is probably the best for Blades of Khaine. If your opponent is getting pushed back by Howling Banshees charging them on their half of the board, it's going to be hard for them to push onto your half of the board, right? But this can be easy to deny points on. If your opponent finds out that you have Contain and they have more models than you, they can just spend their last activation on turning point 3 and 4, moving and dashing a random idiot into your territory and potentially denying you 4 points, just running a random guardsman forward. And that's absolutely brutal. We have so much better game plans just to reliably score those points. So I wouldn't take Contain unless there's a very specific circumstance or scenario that I'm not thinking of offhand. Now, if you have a plurality of striking scorpions, you have access to the Infiltration archetype. And this one's kind of interesting. So the first one is Wiretap. This one is weird. It's really easy to score 1 point a turn, but it's really hard to score 2 points a turn unless your opponent kind of walks into it. They would have to be where you can move a model up and place a Wiretap token within here. Let me double check within 2 inches of an enemy model that has already activated, and within 2 inches of an enemy model that has yet to activate. It can be done, especially against a lot of horde teams that want to be shooting at you and are going to cluster up to use certain buffs, like Brood Brothers maybe, or potentially the Wormblade. I still think we have some better options, and it's a strange game plan. If I was trying to take a Tac Op to be funny, like Wiretap is probably what I would be doing, and I would make a lot of jokes about Baltimore, but it's a strange game plan, and I see what they were trying to do. It's certainly interesting, but it's not great. So the second Infiltration Tac Op is Implant, and honestly, never, not even once. Blades of Khaine is primarily a melee team that actually wants to kill and can't afford to take hits. So, choosing not to deal damage with your attacks seems terrible. I've seen a lot of folks, speculating online that this might be worth taking into some of the Marine teams, but hear me out. If you do that, Yeah, you may max it. Like, if you choose not to deal damage to Space Marines, they certainly won't die. And you'll score some points. But you're basically banking on either being able to... Well, yeah, and you're guaranteeing that they'll beat you on the kill op and the crit op at that point. Because you just won't be able to contest them if you're spending your activations to not kill their models. So then you're banking on being able to deny a lot of points and hoping they can't score their Tac Op. A Tac Op that almost certainly means killing some of your models. So they'll be ahead on the kill op. It seems like a really bad gamble to me. I know I'll put out at least one video about the Space Marine matchups. Honestly, in those matchups, I tend to kind of opt into trying harder to kill my opponent because it can still be done, and if you are able to take a model or two off the table, all it takes is one or two swingy rolls, and then you can really put them behind and win those games. This seems like dooming yourself to be just like slowly steamrolled by Space Marines in an unpleasant way. And third is Surveillance. This one's really good. Surveillance is one of the best Tac Ops in the game for most teams, and I think it's particularly good for striking Scorpions. If you have good terrain, you could potentially get a striking Scorpion into the enemy backline with things like One with a Gloom or Strike and Fade, and make them really hard to dig out for teams that rely on shooting. You can also use, and I can't recall the name of it offhand, that's embarrassing, but the technique to stay and conceal, move through engagement range, and do a drive-by attack on somebody with a striking Scorpion. Because Surveillance requires that you stay in a conceal order, the striking Scorpions have cool tools to still do stuff that contributes towards damaging enemy models and score Surveillance. Between flipping their order with Strike and Fade or staying in conceal and just walking by somebody. So if I were taking Infiltration, Surveillance is almost certainly what I would want to be playing, and it's going to generally be better against teams that want to shoot you and then can't get within 2 inches to shoot at a Scorpion that's used One with a Gloom, that's hanging out behind terrain. Finally, the last category or archetype is Recon, which you gain access to if you have plurality of Howling Banshees. So the first one here is Recover Items, and I would probably pass on this, even though Blades of Khaine are fairly fast in an APL3 team. I don't feel like we have enough actions to spare trying to pick up points all over the map, and at least one is going to be in somewhere really inconvenient to you. We need to be using those actions to fight, to throw smoke grenades, or just complete crit up actions. So I'd probably pass on Recover Items. Luckily, the other two selections in the Recon archetype are considerably better for us. So, second is Confirm Kill. I'm not a huge fan of this Tac Op because it requires that our models live through a turning point after killing something. I tend to plan on anything that I expose to enemy fire getting killed. Now, we do have tools to avoid that. Like I talked about when we were discussing Overrun, Strike and Fade, or Rain of Tears, you can potentially get kills and then get a little extra movement to get safe. However, if you're doing that, I feel like Overrun is going to be a bit better for you. It's kind of a better version of the same game plan because we're an APL3 melee team. Now, that said, I have gotten pretty decent mileage out of Confirm Kill into elites on missions where they can potentially bully us off of the crit op in a big way. I 2 days ago recorded an after-action report from a tournament recently. My second round game was against Legionaries on the mission Extraction. And Extraction is a mission where your opponent, if they choose to just do those crit op actions first, can snag all the points, and then they can actually just shut you out they can get a 6 and you can get a 0 on the crit op, and there's not a ton you can do about it unless you kill their models and try to take that extraction point away from them, the kind of the final point that remains after the others have been tapped. So, you know, I looked at the mission. I figured my opponent would most likely try to take those points because he wants to brawl over points. So I went with confirm kill. The reason for that being, if I don't get those kills, I'm just not going to win that game. You know, if I'm losing on the crit op, I've got to win on the tac op and the kill op. And against elites, confirm kill can really, like, it doesn't take any actions to complete. So you can devote all of your actions to shooting, charging, fighting, double shooting, double fighting, you know, putting through as much damage as possible and trying to win some of those tougher matchups. It may not work every time, but I do think it is one of our better options in some of the tougher matchups there. So, the third one is the first thing that I mentioned, and that's plant beacons. Take it. It's good. It's so good. It's easy to get 6 points on it, as long as you think a turn ahead and make sure that you're sending your pieces where you're staging pieces that you know, like, okay, I'm going to have to move this Howling Banshee in that direction, so it can use a technique, charge, fight, and then plant a beacon, you know, in a place of the board, you know, 6 inches away from my others, right? So it really is just about, like, doing that sort of triangulation of, like, okay, where do I need to place the next ones? And as long as you're thinking a turn ahead, plant beacons is really hard for your opponent to deny. So, just to kind of recap that, if the short version of reviewing Tac Ops was to take plant beacons and profit, my longer version is something like, seriously consider Overrun, plant beacons, surveillance, and maybe confirm kill depending on the matchup and the primary mission. We certainly can play others. I don't want to, you know, I don't want anyone to get the impression that I'm saying that all is lost if you pick something other than that. It's certainly not the case. And it is interesting that we do have the flexibility to take any of the archetypes, depending on how we build our team. But there's a couple that we're really uniquely suited to, like Overrun or Surveillance. And yeah, hopefully that answers some of the questions that you've all had about how I select Tac Ops, which ones I generally take. I know I talked a little bit about matchups there in broad terms. I'm going to put out videos later about specific matchups and how to deal with different things. And when I do that, Tac Ops is something that I'll discuss in depth more. But hopefully this is a good starting point for you. Thanks for listening in, and y'all have a nice day.